Today, Kay Becker is speaking with Carolyn Briggs, a councilor from 1984 to 2007 and a past president of the ABBA from 1995 to 1998. The interview was brought to you by the Australian Brahman Breeders Association in recognition of the 75th year since the formation of the association on the 7th of October 1946. The association and the breed continues to thrive and grow, and many of these stories, past and present, should be recorded for future generations to enjoy.
Today we're going to talk about the Walla days. For anyone who's had anything to do with the Brahman industry, they will certainly know of the Walla days and more than likely have come across Carolyn Briggs in their passings. Good afternoon, Carolyn. Welcome.
Thank you, Kay.
It's lovely to have you. We're going to talk about your days and the Walla stud. Like I said in the introduction, the Walla stud I think was in fact the third registered Brahman stud in the country, and your dad was the head of that empire. Can you take us back to when and where it started? I guess in the early days your father would have been like all graziers and probably had Hereford cattle. When did he bring in Brahmins, and did he ever tell you why?
Well, yes, it's a very long, involved story. There'd been a few bad droughts, and I remember Mum and Dad talking that Dad was going up north. He knew Ken and Monty Atkinson, and he was going up to have a look at what they had up there. And duly, cattle arrived on the train, which pulled up at a little siding called Inner Siding between Morganville and Wallawall.
Yep.
And I was duly sent down to unload them. Well, they were already unloaded from the train into the yards at this siding. And thankfully, I realised that the gate opened north, and I didn't want to go north, I wanted to go south. So I took some slip rails down, hardly had time to get back on my horse, and away they went. Not wild, but, at quite a fair pace, having been on the train for quite a few days from Cairns.
And how old were you at this stage?
I was about 6.
That in itself is no mean feat.
No, actually, I was probably only 5.5, but we won't split hairs about that.
No.
So it took me all of about 3 miles to sort of, A, catch up with them, B, get beside them, and C, get in front of them where I could turn them to where I wanted to go. We had a fence on one side, which was good.
Always helps.
I managed to turn them across the creek, and when we got it, they didn't try and go anywhere in the creek. They had a drink and went up the other bank, and that was only about 500 or 600 yards from the yards. I had a fence on both sides, so that was pretty easy. Into the yards and shut it. And there were bulls there, young bulls. I think one's name was Odin and the other was Laertes, and a few cows from Weatherby, Mount Malloy, Weatherby, and Ken Atkinson from Wairuna.
Yep.
And that was, I went about my business, and I didn't think that was, a difficult situation. And then a couple of days later, Dad had let them out into what we called the Riverside Horse Paddock. And I was out getting the sheep. Most people in the country in those days had a few sheep for killers, and you couldn't leave them out after dark. The dingoes would get them.
Yep.
And I hadn't actually heard a Brahman bellowing. And I was walking along the river behind these sheep, and all of a sudden up to my left, where our Walla graves are, I heard this really weird noise. And so help me, Kathy Freeman couldn't have caught me. Well, all I'd heard was shorthorns and Herefords bellowing, you know. totally different sound. That was my very first introduction to Brahman.
So tell me, what did you think when you got to the train, the siding and the yards, and here were these cattle that would have, in those days, would have had big humps, long ears, probably had horns even.
Oh, yes.
You know, did you think, oh, what on earth has Dad done, or were you too little to really even...
Well, I wasn't old enough to think like that. Dad said they were the future. This was about 1940, beginning of 46.
Yep.
End of 45. I wasn't sort of old enough to think about anything like that.
No.
If they were what Dad reckoned was the future, that was good enough for me. But then the 46, 47 drought followed, and we only had Herefords and shorthorn cows, and they were in calf to a lot of these bulls, and we had all these little F1 brindle ballies, dark red ballies running round, and Marg and Rob and myself and Dad and a couple of other men, I think, we took all the cows down the Burnett River to feed on the banks because the drought was horrendous. And a lot of cows died, and we had all these little sort of 3, 4, 5-month-old crossbred calves who basically, you know, had to fend for themselves. One of the saddest things, I remember Dad had to go up the other end and block up some mob or something. I found this cow bogged in the water. The Burnett River was very nearly dry, except the odd hole. And when Dad came back, I was sitting with the cow's nose on my lap, but we were all in the water because she was dead. That was one of those minor tragedies that young people remember forever.
Yep. And so...
But her calf survived, so that was okay.
So can you remember the makeup of that load of Brahmins that arrived from the north? Were they predominantly bulls, or was there a mixture?
No, there was I think there was 5 cows and 3 bulls.
Did your father ever mention during his time what he actually paid for that herd?
Not that I can remember.
Yeah.
But I know it was in guineas.
Yep.
I mean, I don't want to say something and then have it wrong. But that was the very first ones we got.
Yep.
And then we got some more from a chap called Clem Geddes that was up north of Brockhampton. And by this time I was at boarding school.
Yep.
And but we went mustering every holidays, and we all learned to be fairly quick on the uptake, because whilst Dad always tailed weaners and things, and nothing ever got wild, but they could move briskly, put it that way. Move very briskly. Because, Kay, the wildest cattle I've ever had anything to do with was some feral Jerseys and a couple of old Hereford pikers that were scrubbers up in the Goodnight Scrub. So, I've never thought about Brahmins as being extra wild, if you know what I mean.
No. I guess
having grown up with them from 4 and 5 years old, I guess it sort of hasn't occurred to me.
No.
That they were as bad as everybody made out. But oh dear, we put up with some terrible ribbing from the district.
I was going to say, it would have been a big change in direction, I guess, for your dad, to go into that more southern country with these, as they used to call them, yaks, and they had all sorts of names for them.
Oh, I know. And the ribbing that we all got, that Dad got mostly.
Yep.
Although when we did start showing, and Lionel DeLanders had cattle there, and this was down in Brisbane Exhibition, and we weren't allowed up in the bull stalls. We had to have our cattle down in the dairy stalls. We weren't allowed up in the stud beef cattle stalls.
And so can you remember about when did that change? Like, your parents would have showed at Brisbane Show for a long, long time. Can you remember when you were allowed from the dairy stalls to then so-called migrate to the upper echelon?
Sort of 59, 60, I guess.
Yep, yeah.
It was... I really should have thought of all this before I started talking to you.
That's all right. That's all right. Yeah.
No, I can't remember exactly, but one of the horrendous things that my father made me do, he came out to the stalls. Well, we didn't count out there, Rob did, but we girls didn't when we were very young. Dad made me go into the dairy stalls and strip some milk out of a cow for his tea. And, I mean, what a vandalistic thing to do. Now I look back on it, it's a wonder we weren't all thrown into jail. Those poor owner of that particular cow was probably on a milk production scale. But anyway, that was, I hope nobody hears it. Well, that's got to be 70 years ago. So it won't matter.
No, I was going to say, I don't think it's matter, and I'm sure over the years that's probably the least of their worries. So, in those days, the early days when you went to Brisbane to show, and, it was considered to be, somewhat outlandish that someone would think that their cattle could be, dare I say it, the Herefords of the day. What year did you start to feel like you'd made it in the show ring? Can you remember winning your first broad ribbon in Brisbane?
Can't tell you exactly when it was, but by the late 50s, early 60s, people were we were all being accepted, except by the real stalwart Hereford breeders. I remember our grandfather came out and he was jackarooing on Iron Bark Station, which was owned by the Spencers.
Yep.
And they were cousins or relations of his. And I can remember Mum and Dad sitting on the bales of hay eating fish and chips and out of a paper bag, out of a newspaper, as you did in those days.
Yep.
And the Spencers walked past and looked the other way. Having been related and mates for so long, because Dad showed Herefords up until about 51.
Yep. And so was it a progression, your father would have sort of gone north and bought those initial cattle with a bit of blind faith that he was making the right decision. Can you sort of fill us in? How long did it take? Was he so impressed with the first few years of having those cattle, he said, right, we'll slowly but surely get rid of all of these bally cattle and this is what we're going to do? Or was it just a slow progression and eventually, you ended up with a purebred, highly sought after Brahman herd?
Well, he bought pure, high-grade bulls as often as he could.
Yep.
Which wasn't easy. And then the advent of winter feeding came in and we'd feed molasses and you sort of bred up a lot more quickly after that, because back in the mid to late 40s, droughts were totally devastating. And by the time we started, by the end of the 40s, we started to get a lot of Brahman cross heifers together and of our own breed. And, slowly we got rid of the brindles and, yes, I guess that, then we started, or one of the interesting things, when we were getting into so much, ribbing from everybody, in the late 50s, Dad got the local Walla butcher to come at a grazier's meeting, and which was held at Walla that particular time, the country of the yaks, as everybody used to go on. And we had with the Hereford, someone produced a Hereford steer, and we had a Brahman steer. We had a cut-out competition, you know, different cuts of meat and how heavy and big and good they were. But that was in 1959, I think.
Yep.
But by that time, you know, Dad had had them for 12 or 13 years. So
Yep.
we were we'd run out of Herefords well before then.
Yeah. You know, it's an interesting thing. You know, your father, it would have been a huge thing, and clearly it was a defining time in the Innes family's timeline. The Walla stud went on for a lot of years, and I've read here where in the early 1970s, your father was part of a program that airlifted cattle from Brisbane to Thailand for a breeding program. That would have been a pretty huge step in what was a relatively short period of time, I guess.
Yes, that was a very interesting occurrence, that one.
Yep.
There were quite a few little little instances like that, you know, even people in the South and Western Australia, all of a sudden in the tick area, they just exploded, bearing in mind that there had been Brahman cattle down at the Melbourne Zoo, which, interestingly, when they escaped onto the Illawarra Plains, they crossed with the local shorthorns down there, and they were the forerunners. The progeny of that cross were the forerunners of the Illawarra shorthorn.
Well, there you go. I've learned something today.
Yes, and because, see, in India, a lot of those Brahman cattle, zebu cattle, a lot of them were for milking too.
Yeah.
And some of them were very strong and speedy, and back in the 1800s, they'd tow the gun carriages.
Mm.
You know, it's a very interesting, the whole history of Brahmins, and of course they went to America first, and then we got a Manso bull that came out.
Yep.
And Dad bought one of those.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the start of the really good show cattle that we had, and a line of good purebred cows that Ken Atkinson had from a previous importation.
Yeah. I can.
There are so many people involved now. I'm a little bit sad at the demise of the Walla stud.
Yeah, it's interesting. The whole process. When did at what stage did your father sort of say to you as a family, okay, we've got enough street cred, I guess, and we've got enough cattle under our belt here now to really step this up. We're going to get serious about the show game, and you showed cattle basically from Cairns to Melbourne, and you also had enough stud cattle to be able to sell and become part of a burgeoning industry. When did can you sort of slot that into your timeline? Were you just out of school? Were you still at school? Did it all happen?
No, we were out of school, but at that stage they'd started a sale up in Townsville as well. But there were F1s and they weren't called that. They were crossbred Brahman bulls, yep. Some brindles.
Yep.
And Marg and I took a load up to the Townsville sale in the train.
Yeah.
That was a pretty exciting trip.
So, do you want to elaborate on that? That wouldn't have been an overnight trip.
It wasn't, and there were a couple of really nice. It was a goods train, so there were only the driver, the driver's mate, and a fireman, and a couple of guards. And Marg and I made friends with them, and they'd lift the buckets of water up in to help us water the bulls. And we used to get out and drink tea and coffee with them at the sidings. It was all very cold, of course.
Mm.
And we camped in a little guards van. That was, oh dear, what year would have that been? That would have been about 1960, 59, 60.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Mum and Dad drove up and brought us home after the sale and show.
And so can you remember what sort of money those bulls made at that stage?
No, I can't actually.
Yeah.
Looking after the cattle was sort of my main interest.
Yep.
The money was Dad's department.
Well, can you remember him coming home? Was he happy, or did he think?
Oh, no, very happy, yes. Compared to the prices, compared to ordinary cattle prices, and everything in those days was sold in guineas.
Yeah, yep.
Which you mightn't even know what a guinea is. It was 21 shillings.
Yes, it's something that's a bit foreign to a lot. And that's what I mean. The sheer determination of the family to make it succeed is amazing, because you're all still tied up within the industry in some way, shape or form. Be it Brahmins or the Shorthorns or a mixture of all. It was certainly something that your father and obviously your mother instilled in you both, in all of you. To have 4 girls and all be involved in the Brahmin industry is probably pretty unique, I would have thought.
Oh, well, the Kirks, the same. The Kirk girls are pretty much the same. There's 4 of them.
Yeah.
And they're a lot younger, of course. I better not claim them as the same age. That'll make them a bit sour. But yes, we're all involved, heavily involved, and they're all involved. They still do a lot of showing.
Yep.
We haven't showed since Rob. We did as Vice Briggs, and Margaret did as M.Y. Morgan.
Yep.
Busy's family still show.
Mm-hmm.
Nettle Creek, yes. So,
yep.
No, we're all still heavily involved.
Yep. So your dad sort of really did dig in over during his journey. He was actually the chairman of the Brahman breeders. Can you remember that all transpiring?
Oh yes. We were quite old by then because. A lot of people went in front of him, even though he was third stud registered.
Yep.
Well, he and Lionel did it the same day, Lionel de Landors.
Yep.
And then, 6 others followed over the next 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
But no, Dad was totally and utterly committed to Brahman cattle.
Yep. And so, during that time, I mean, there's lots, in this day and age, there's lots of people who are committed to the breed, but if you get behind the scenes, they've all got, a Charbray bull or an Angus bull in their herd now, and there's that infiltration. Was that your dad's cup of tea, or he was dedicated and everything was a grey Brahman?
He was a purist.
Yep.
He didn't like the thought of people even talking about flatbacks. He always said, once you lose that nice lower tail setting, your cow's birth canals are no good and you'll be pulling calves.
Yep.
And I don't think Dad, once we had Brahmins, ever pulled a calf.
No.
And, there were so many things that came lately. I mean, I know a lot of studs who put Chianinas to get a bit of size in their cattle.
Yep.
Charolais, no, Dad wouldn't tolerate any of that. They had to be, and he wouldn't, we started with that 7/8, 15, 16, 31, 32nds, which donates the amount of blood in the cattle.
Yeah, yep.
But I do know that, in America they graded up to Brahmins. They were the beginning of the Brahmin, not of commercial Brahmins, but definitely of the stud seed stock. Now, of course, we're sending semen back to America.
So did your dad ever go to the States? Did Walla go to the States and bring back any semen or in fact live bulls at that stage?
Yes, Rob did. you know, we don't talk, I do, nobody sort of talks about Rob now because of the problems he's run into.
Yep.
But he was an exceptionally good cattle judge and a cattleman.
Yeah.
And he had a very big influence on it all. Yes, he went, they bought some Hindu Brazils and Hudgens, and yes, there were a lot of American cattle in the Walla bloodlines, but Rob just had the knack, and Dad, of course, too, and we girls while we were there.
Yep. And so, in your own herd and your own business, do you still, you know, look for the traits in Brahman cattle that your father thought were the things that made them what they were, and the Mickey Mouse of cattle?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. Yep. And have you passed that knowledge on?
What was that?
I said, have you passed that knowledge on to your kids?
Yes, hopefully. Well, Anna's got a double dose of it because she married a McCamley.
She certainly has a double dose of it. There's no risk about that.
And, yes, we're all, you know, pretty much of the same mind.
Yep.
Of what constitutes a Brahman beast.
Yeah.
And it's no good, whilst carcass competitions are mostly won by crossbreds and European and British cattle, you cannot get away from purebred Brahmins, especially for base herds.
So do you think, you know, no one enjoys a drought, but if it hadn't been for those dry times, do you think your father would have gone looking for them, or do you think, you know, he was clearly well ahead of his time in his whole thought processes and the whole way he did business? Do you think his hand was forced, I guess, to go and find something to survive those droughts?
Well, we already had some before the 46, 47. That's how we had all those little crossbred calves when their poor mothers died.
Yep.
But yes, I think it was the whole concept. He'd been up north, he'd seen what they were doing there. Yes, he decided that whilst improving your country was very good, was far too expensive. You're better off trying to drought-proof your herd rather than drought-proof your country to start with.
Yeah. And so was he only ever a grey Brahmin man?
No, they all ran together. So yes, he didn't have a differentiation, but we did have some very good red cattle from a Sir Tim line that Dad had got up north, from Ken Atkinson and from, what was his name, Clem Geddes, yes. So it was very interesting times, and we all put up with a lot of, here comes that yak.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, Carolyn, your ears aren't as big as they could be, are they? You know, it was just one of those things that you put up with.
Yeah. And so over the years, you know, the Walla stud has you know, I guess not ceased to exist, because if you go back through lineages, which a lot of people like to do, the Walla name would still come up. But you girls grew up, went off and got married, and you know, you all dabbled in the Brahmin industry. Can you sheet back your start to some cattle that were given to you by your dad?
Yeah, Dad gave us a very good purebred cow. Spicer already had Brahmin cattle. That's my husband.
Mm-hmm.
We were married in 68,
yep.
and he'd bought Brahmin cattle, and you know, back in sort of 63 and 4 bulls, just to breed bullocks with and replacement heifers. Mm-hmm. We didn't get a stud going until I got married and brought that cow up from Dad. I can remember a funny little incident. Margaretta got a cow. She was married a couple of years before me, And her cow had twin heifers, and I can always remember thinking, yeah, well, she's got the jump on us all. She's got 2 of them. But that was a very personal thing. If you're going to delete anything, delete that. But no, we've all maintained our interest, and we're all very good friends, and as we are with Rob,
Yep.
he's always very interested in what we're doing and how it's all going.
Yeah, no. And so, do the Inneses still own Walla? Is there,
No, they don't.
Yep.
Bentley, our second son, bought the. Well, there was only the 320-acre house block left. Everything else had been sold, and he owned that for quite a while. Did the old homestead up, made it into a beautiful setup.
Yeah.
But then it wasn't profitable enough, so he sold that and moved on.
Yep. Yeah.
And
So over the years, what were some of the as a family, as the Innes family before you all got married, that there would have been some exciting wins in the show rings over that time, right across the nation, I could imagine.
Oh, look, it was exceptionally good fun. And one thing I would like to point out is that we all had a really good fun in the show barns. But what happens in the show barns stays in the show barns.
I'm sure it does, and I have no doubt about that. But let's get to the ring. Once you got to the ring, where there would have been.
Oh, look, it was. You were always very disappointed if you didn't get champion bull or reserve champion bull, or one of those sort of.
Yep.
Never any ill feeling about it, but there was always just a little bit of disappointment.
Yep.
And that went on after Marg and I were married, with Rob and the other 2 girls.
Yep.
That all just kept on keeping on.
And so was there one show, there must have been one royal show that you came home from. If you picked up a broad ribbon in Sydney in the early days, you would have surely really felt like you'd kicked a pretty big goal in those days. There must have been one ribbon down there that you can say that was the ultimate.
Yes, we used to have to stop to take the show team to Sydney. We used to have to stop off at Wallangarra for 10 days.
Oh gosh!
And Wallangarra is a cold place in April, May. And then we had to dip the cattle. Well, of course, the minute you dip the Brahmins in that cold weather, all their hair, the bit of hair that they did have, it all stand up on end. And we had some very good fun. Drove on then down to Sydney and got.
So, did you truck the cattle to Sydney, or did they go by train?
No, we trucked them.
Right.
Busy's husband, they weren't married then, of course. Busy's husband, Mike Fay, and I took the first load down.
Yep.
And we had great fun, camped at Wallangarra for 10 days.
I can only imagine. Not a lot at Wallangarra anyway.
The worst thing I can remember on that trip, apart from all the cattle sort of, one bull, our main bull that we had down there, we had to drench him because he must have got a mouthful of dip. They'd never been through a dip in their lives.
No.
And we thought, we'll never be able to push them into the dip.
Yep.
But they did, and he got a mouthful of dip, and there was a funny in one of the papers in Sydney, don't know where the cutting is now, Dad on a motel, in his hotel bed, and lying beside the bull, and he said to Mum in the caption, "Sorry, Phil, there's no room for you here." because Dad was lying beside the bull because it was not very well, you know, and funny things like that happened. But yeah, we were thrilled. We got senior champion and overall champion lots and lots of times.
Yeah. And you know, they're always a thrill. But I could only imagine how much a thrill it would have been, you know, in the south, like you say, where the British breeds were still considered to be, you know, the royalty of the cattle industry. So in the show, you know, getting together a show team is a huge effort, and to have them, like you would have had them, you know, to do those big hauls that took a long time. Were you the main stud breaker and handler, or did you have a team?
Oh no, we all did it.
Yep.
Marg and I particularly, and then I was after she left. She got married in '64.
Yep.
And I didn't fly the coop. Oh no single one of us did it. You know, Rob had a big input. We all did it.
Yeah, yeah. And did you ever miss breaking in stud cattle, or was it a job that you never really enjoyed?
Oh no, it was just something we did. It was, you know, it was an effort sometimes to get them leading properly, and as you can imagine, you know, you'd start when they were fairly young.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was always a little bit of a drama when they went to the first show and they were only sort of 12, 14 months old. But by the time they were 2.5, you know, everything was fine.
Yeah, yeah. Carolyn, it appears to be something a bit like riding a bike. Once you learn how to do it, I've seen you at many a show give a young child a bit of inspiration and a bit of knowledge on how to do it and what to do. Do you miss it?
Not at this age, but I did for a long time.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed not necessarily the thrill of winning, but the thrill of achieving what you'd set out to achieve was the most important thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But when we had our show team, you know, it wasn't as though we had heaps and heaps of people. We had lights on in the show barn, and we wouldn't get home from mustering till just on dark. Well, by the time you'd done all your jobs and, you know, fed them and led them over from one place to the other, got them in from the paddock, you know, it was a sort of a 4:30 start and a 8:30 p.m. finish, lots and lots of days.
Yeah, yeah.
And if we were out mustering, some person would, if you weren't all on horses and you had a vehicle, because to start with there was no such thing as a truck. You didn't get trucked with your horses to where you were mustering. You rode, you did your mustering and you rode home again.
Yeah.
And when we got the truck, you know, that was just the bee's knees. And someone could go home early and start.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can remember one day it was my turn and I got home about 4:30 and I finished. You know, I got everything done and in and finished by about 7. Yeah. And I should have gone to look for the others, but there was a program. We'd only just got television, and there was a program on television I wanted to watch. It had Emma Peel and John Steed in it. What was that? Oh, The Avengers, that's right. And so I sat and watched The Avengers for half an hour and then went out, and of course they'd broken down and they were really sour that I'd take. I didn't tell them why I was late. I just said, oh, well, I had trouble, you know, doing this and that and getting the bulls caught. You'd have to catch them and put their holders on and lead them and feed them. And, you know, it was a drama. But I never did tell anybody about the Avengers. I stayed to watch for half an hour.
There had to be some benefits sometimes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And we had, you know, at that stage then we had a couple of really good people, you know, younger men that helped with mustering and, you know, did their share of the work as well.
Mm. You said earlier that, the finance part of it was something that your father, had control of. Can you ever remember, him, one of your bulls making back then what was considered to be really good money? We talk now of averages of if you don't get an average of $10,000 or $15,000, your sales not being that good anymore. Once upon a time, if you paid $15,000 for a bull, that was top money.
Oh, totally top money. The highest priced bull Spicer Briggs ever sold was 10,000, and we thought we were made.
Yep.
And then when steer prices went up, I think we had $1,290 for per beast.
Yeah.
And I had a glass top table, and I ironed out the weigh sheet, the pay sheet, and stuck it under the glass. That was just something else. Now, of course, total chicken feed.
Yeah, that's right. It is all.
Total chicken feed now.
But can you remember your dad sort of coming home from a bull sale that you were vendors at and going, that was a good sale, and the top price was $8,000 or
Yes,
£2,000, whatever it may have been.
There was guineas then.
Yep.
And I think he got 8,000 guineas once.
That would have been serious money.
That was serious money.
Yeah.
And I think the agents got the shilling. I don't think there was a percentage. I think it was whatever 1 shilling is of 20.
Yeah, yep.
What's that, 5? No, it's not 5%. Quickly, you're younger than me in maths.
Oh, maths is not one of my strong points, Carolyn.
Yes. So, back in those days, that was and that all changed just about when I was married, and it became dollars, dollars and cents then.
Yeah, yep.
I still convert weights, but I don't convert money anymore. I know my dollars and cents, but my weights still trick me.
Yeah. On the converse side of that, can you ever remember your father bringing home a bull that he'd bought at a sale somewhere and said,
yes, we bought a bull called Noel. He cost a lot of money. I don't want to say what, because off the top of my head, thinking about my own business all day today, I did intend, I'm sorry, Kay, I did intend to write myself some notes and look about these things, think them through. And
no, that's okay. So where did that bull...
Yes, he bought Noel, and we bought another bull called Lord Argyle.
Where did they come from?
Lord Argyle came from the Orient stud.
Ah, yes, yep.
Noel was... off the top of my head. I'm old, dear. Don't think I'm...
No, you're... And so, was that early in the Walla days?
No, that was about in the... We bred our own bulls from those Wairuna cows, and then from the Manso bull for a long time. But then to get our herd bulls going, of course, you kept a lot of cattle that you weren't going to show anyway.
No.
But we had a lot of success with our own breed cattle over the years.
Yeah.
And Rob did a heck of a good job.
Yep.
And as did Margaretta and Biz and Tika, our other sister. We all had an input. It was a family affair.
Yep. And I guess, that in itself is something that the Walla stud and indeed the Innes family can be very proud of, because it's no mean feat to try to manage, 5 different personalities in children plus your parents and everyone still be friends. And
absolutely. You've got that right, dear. We had a few arguments, a few falling outs.
Yep.
One of the funny things, or not funny, but one of the things that I particularly remember, when Dad was still showing Herefords, even though we had the Brahman commercial, he still had paddock of stud Hereford cows, and it would have been about 49 or 50, and Darcy Croft, who was the country life photographer, was at Walla taking photographs of some of the bulls. And I said, Mr. Croft, when are you going to start advertising Brahmins? And he said, my dear girl, I will start as soon as they start doing proving some use to the beef industry.
Oh!
I was about 9, and I can remember feeling extremely indignant. It's not the sort of thing a 9-year-old, very well mannered, of course, so I said nothing. And now, of course, probably better than 50% of the Australian beef herd's got Brahman in it.
I was going to say, Carolyn, that was all you needed to hear to make you more determined than ever that you were going to make it successful.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm not sure, I sort of, my mind doesn't go back to that, but I'm not sure whether he did live to see all that occurring, or I'm sure he did.
Yeah, no. So anything else you'd like to add?
No, dear, unless there's something you think I should talk about that I haven't thought of.
I think that's a great story. It's an excellent story and something you can be very proud of.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I know. We all worked hard, but we all had great fun.
That's right, that's right. So hard work's fine so long as it's followed up with good fun.
Well, it's the only thing to do, you know. All you can do is teach your children a work ethic.
Yep.
And good manners.
Caroline, it's been a great chat. We are certainly indebted to you and to your dad and the rest of the Innes family for their support of the Brahman industry and the insurance that the industry continued to grow. Great to catch up, and we'll talk soon. Bye.